Where to start? I guess I'll start with the first encounter I had. At least I think this was my first encounter. So about 2 years ago, I was out in the woods near my house. I was out there for about an hour when I got a sudden feeling of dread, like something was watching me. Now, I should mention that it most likely wasn't a cougar because there hasn't been a single sighting of cougars in those woods for the last decade. I looked around to see what was there, but all I saw was a deer. After a minute or two, I decided it was best for me to head home. 10 minutes later, I was safely back at my house. The next day, I went back to the very same spot to see what I could find, but all I could see were fresh deer tracks and my own from the previous day. I stayed out in the woods for another hour or so before heading back home. I went out into those woods almost every day for about a year, but never saw anything out of the ordinary. Although I have to say, I would sometimes get the feeling that I was being watched. Fast forward to about 10 months prior to today, and that's when I had the second encounter. It was a nice warm sunny day, and I was over at my neighbor's mowing the lawn when I saw something odd from the corner of my eye. A coyote came out of the woods, and what really stood out was its enormous size. Without a warning, it came running straight toward me, and it was only when I let out a sharp whistle that it scurried back into the woods. I've seen coyotes before, but something about this one terrified me. I promptly went back home once I finished mowing the lawn. Back at my house, I had just put the lawnmower away in the barn. Then, as I was walking down from the barn, my black lab came running to meet me. My lab may only weigh 55 pounds, but she's extremely protective of me and will always stand between me and danger. She was running toward me when she stopped dead in her tracks. She then started to whimper, got low to the ground, the hair on her back stood straight up, and she ran back toward the house. As those things happened, the feeling of dread from a year ago came back to my mind. It was the same feeling of being watched by something ominous. The next action I took was awfully dumb. Instead of being in constant fear, I decided to face the mysterious presence. I walked back up the hill to the barn and looked around searching for something, anything. That feeling of dread persevered as I continued the search. In fact, it didn't go away until I returned home and took a step in my own yard. I then walked toward Abby, my dog, and did my best to calm her down. I brought her inside the house, and the rest of the day went without a hitch, but the troubles were far from over. Starting from that day and for the next 2 months, I would look out the window into the darkness of the night, and I can swear to you that I felt something looking right back at me. Then another 2 anxiety-filled months passed by when I came to a realization that I had to find the thing or the presence that was stalking me. In hindsight, that was a mistake. A few days thereafter, I chose to stay at work until late at night because I wanted to go home when it was completely dark outside. When I drive at night, I normally have both the headlights and the road lights turned on for better visibility. But the goal was to be less conspicuous on this night, and so the road lights remained off as I drove home. Sometime later, I took the turn to get on the road to my house and proceeded to slow down to 25 miles per hour. The drive on this road can get quite spooky at nights because it's flanked by forest on either side. I continued driving down the road, all the while feeling a little uneasy but still composed. I must have been about a quarter of a mile away from my house when I was confronted by the feeling of dread once again. Right away, I felt the need for better visibility. I turned the road lights on, which, by the way, the LEDs in those lights produce 2000 lumens that light up everything like a Christmas tree. Up ahead on the road, I was fast approaching a section of the forest which was recently logged. As soon as I got close to the spot, I saw it. I don't know how exactly I should describe the creature since it's something that I've never seen before, but the best I can describe it It looked like a deer standing on 2 feet. It's hard to characterize the general perception of the entire situation, but I can tell you for sure that something about it was just wrong. I immediately floored the gas pedal and drove home as fast as my truck would go. Shortly thereafter, I pulled into my driveway, parked the truck, then quickly ran inside the house. Thankfully, I haven't seen the creature again since that night. However, I can still sense that it comes by time to time. In one night last week, I felt its presence stronger than ever. Not having experienced anything remotely similar before, I can't be for sure, but I feel that it may be readying to make another appearance. I've been feeling its presence more frequently in recent days, and that may be another sign that the creature is up to something. Hopefully nothing happens, but I'll keep you updated if anything of significance takes place. Hey guys, I think the title should be self-explanatory. This is obviously a story from my own experience. Let me just preface the story with some background information. This was when I was 10 years old and I had, well, more like my family had moved from Italy to Paraguay not too long ago. We lived in Italy when I was much younger, but then we moved to South Korea for a while and then moved back to Italy for only a brief period of time. So yeah, 10 years old in Paraguay. My dad was always a big gun enthusiast, and so I naturally grew up around guns. He also liked hunting games and would often take me with him on his hunting trips. Once we arrived in Paraguay, he wasted no time figuring out how to own guns legally and where he could hunt legally. Just a quick note, I'm telling this story from my memory, so you'll have to excuse me if I fumble around to find the right words. But continuing, my dad spoke just enough Spanish to achieve some basic communication at the time, and I was only slightly better than him. But he had somehow purchased a rifle legally and also hired a guide to take him to his first hunting trip in Paraguay. So we left on a Friday at night, and the destination was a region called Chaco. If my memory serves me right, I think it was located in the western region of Paraguay. It's essentially the most remote region in the country. I don't know how things changed today, but at the time, they still had the native tribes living there without having acclimated to the 21st century. It took roughly about 8 or 9 hours, I think, to drive from Asunción, which is the capital of Paraguay, to the borders where Chaco begins. Once you get to that border, actually, a couple hours before you get to that border, you begin to see very few houses along the way. You have to drive miles upon miles to find any sign of human civilization. So if you get lost or injured there, you are fudged. So that basically means once you are well into Chaco, you are on your own. By, about midday, we were genuinely on our own in the outskirts of Chaco. We set up camp there, had lunch, and the plan was to hunt for a few hours on that day, call it a night, and then go for the real hunting session on the next day. I think they had jaguars there, but we were there for capybara and birds. My dad let me shoot a few times, but I couldn't hit anything. But then he did successfully hunt a couple of birds, which we had for dinner when we returned to camp. I don't know if it was just the atmosphere or if I was that hungry, but I do remember it was the most delicious thing I had ever tasted. After dinner, it wasn't that late, but the surrounding area was pitch black. We had the fire going, I had an oil lamp in front of me, and Dad was telling me about his previous hunting trips. I was having a lot of fun and had no problem to report, aside from the fact that I was a little sleepy. But then sleepy I wasn't when out of nowhere, we began to hear something, wild animals or people doing a circle around our camp. Whatever they were, you could tell they were making a conscious effort to not run beyond the perimeter of the lights coming from our campsite. I froze like an ice sculpture. I was scared beyond belief. But then Dad was already up with the rifle aimed toward, well, nothing but the sound. The guide actually looked a lot more panicked than my dad, and the man began firing toward the darkness even though he couldn't see a thing. Dad quickly snatched the gun out of the man's hands as soon as he emptied the magazine. That was the right thing to do because we were definitely in more danger with the guy shooting like a nutjob. We continued to hear the footsteps doing circles around our camp for at least another 10 minutes until all went quiet again. The crazy thing is, even if those things or people had stopped running, you would at least hear them walk away or make some sort of sound since they were standing on dry grass, leaves, and twigs. But nothing. It was almost as if they had evaporated into thin air. They just disappeared. The good thing is they didn't come back. Dad stood guard non-stop until morning, and I fell asleep at some point, I guess, and woke up at like 8 in the morning. Dad and the guide were looking for something on the ground, and so I went up to them and asked them what they were trying to find. As it turns out, they weren't looking for anything, but rather they were inspecting the peculiar formation on the ground. The grass around the perimeter of our camp were flattened in a shape and form that you'd expect to see after maybe 100 people ran around in circle. The footsteps looked chaotic, but as a whole, they were formed in nearly a perfect circle, with our camp being the center point. We were definitely visited and encircled by whatever or whoever had left all those tracks. Seeing the size of the circle and the number of footsteps had instilled a great fear in me, and I was ready to go home. We packed our stuff and left the camp early. I personally never went back to Chaco after that, but I know for a fact my dad did go back a few times with a new guide. He lived to tell the tale for every one of his hunting trips, and so that crazy event happened only one time. If you ask me today what might have paid us a visit that night, I don't think I have an answer for that. It could have been the native tribe, I suppose, because I really don't see how a pack of animals could have left the kinds of tracks we saw that morning. And yeah, that was one of the scariest things that I had ever experienced as a child. If I were put in the same situation today, I'd still be scared to death, and therefore I think I'm okay with not uncovering the mystery of that night. Thanks for listening, guys. Goodbye for now. I was 6 years old when I was on a family vacation during the first week of summer break. We left from Alabama to Arizona. My grandpa and grandma were there, so were my cousin, aunt, sister, and of course my parents. We drove all the way to Arizona, and it took us about 15 to 17 hours to get there. At least that's how I remember. We all stayed in a motel, and I was sharing a room with my parents and sister. But since I wanted to stay with my grandparents, I asked Mom if I could, and she allowed it. There's one key point I have to disclose before we proceed with the story, and that's the location of the bathroom. It was a cheap motel, and therefore the bathroom was actually situated at the back of the building from where we were staying at. You actually had to walk to the reception area and ask for the key if you wanted to use the bathroom. But let us continue with the story. So we got 3 rooms in total. My grandparents and I were staying in the first room, my cousin and aunt stayed in the room next to ours, and my parents and sister were in the last room. Being on the same floor and staying right next to one another, we were having lots of fun until nature called. Grandpa walked out of the room with me so he could take me to the bathroom. When we were out in the hallway, we saw that Aunt was also taking my cousin to the bathroom. Grandpa told Aunt to stay in the room and that he'll take both of us to the bathroom. We all walked toward the reception to get the key, and that's when we saw something bolt across the complex at an incredible speed. No human could ever hope to run as fast. The thing or creature, whatever you may want to call it, it looked pale and tall. None of us were really frightened, and I think that's because we all thought our minds were playing tricks on us. I can't really explain how all 3 of us felt the same way, but we did nonetheless. We finished our business in the bathroom and were walking back to the entrance of the motel when we saw the same creature slumped over with its back toward us. The creature looked bony and malnourished, as though it hasn't eaten in weeks. We slowly walked backward so as not to alert it, but my cousin ended up stepping on a twig, inevitably snapping it and thus generating a loud crunch sound. The creature turned around in no time, then it stood straight up to make itself big. It looked at us intently as it let out an eerie howl, which had a rich static sound quality to it. I couldn't believe what I was seeing next, because the creature shape-shifted into a big dog resembling a Great Dane as it continued to stand on its two hind legs. When it was finished with the transformation, it wasted no time and ran off, smashing through a steel fence like it was nothing. The motel manager came out with a startled look on his face and told us that he had seen the creature as well, as if he needed a confirmation from us. I then asked if he knew what the creature was, and he firmly stated that it was a Skinwalker. That was my first encounter with the said creature, but my experience with that doesn't end there. My second encounter with a Skinwalker occurred when I was 10 years old. I was in the Boy Scouts, and this one time, we went to Utah for a retreat. We arrived at the campsite at 4:30 p.m. We then walked deep into the woods to set up camp and had the campfire burning by 5:30 p.m. Lucky for me, my grandpa had accompanied us as one of our leaders, and we were having a wonderful time. We gathered by the campfire and began roasting marshmallows to make s'mores. Some of the guys told stories of skinwalkers on that land to make the night a little more interesting, shall we say. Sometime later that night, we began to hear things moving around us. The wave of fear washed over every child by the campfire. I was scared as well, but at the same time, I didn't want everyone panicking over some random noises. I told the group, "Guys, if you hadn't noticed, we are in the middle of the woods, so really it could be anything." But before I even had a chance to breathe after my short speech, a blood-curdling screech enveloped the entire forest. The sound was a mixture of a high-pitched cry of a dying animal and that of a wolf, with a particularly high-pitched howl as well. The cry lasted about 25 seconds. It was continuous, and whatever was making the noise, it didn't take a single breath throughout the cry. Everyone remained silent as my grandpa slowly reached for the shotgun he brought for protection. After our last encounter with the creature, I don't think he was about to leave anything to chance. So he got himself a gun license and a shotgun for exactly a situation like this. Everyone looked scared out of their minds. My buddy was sitting next to me, and I saw him pissing himself while one of the group leaders was shaking like a leaf. The footsteps were getting closer, and Grandpa pointed his shotgun toward the direction of the sound. His movements were jittery, and his face was filled with anxiety to the point that it looked as though he was about to have a panic attack. Then from the darkness of the forest emerged a creature. It was close enough to the campfire that we could see it in all of its grotesque detail. It was unmistakably a wolf, but somehow it was standing on its two hind legs, which looked more like they belonged to a deer. If that wasn't enough to scare us half to death, its eyes were glowing bright yellow, staring us down. It let out its terrifying cry again, and we all screamed like we had lost our minds. Suddenly, a loud bang deafens our ears as Grandpa fires his shotgun. The creature gets sprayed with pellets, but unfortunately for us, it doesn't even flinch. Grandpa just stood there in shock and horror as the creature slowly walked toward him. Then suddenly, Grandpa got his senses back and fired another shot at the creature. It did nothing. The creature continued walking closer, and soon it was towering over my grandpa. We all watched in horror as it leaned over and got right in my grandpa's face. The thing was so close to him, its face was probably no further than 2 inches away from my grandpa's. It didn't make any sound, but it huffed and blew its breath into my grandpa's horrified face. Then, just as it came unannounced, it bolted off into the woods at an incredible speed. We were all still gathered around the campfire, and all we could do was to stare at each other in absolute fear. My buddy, who pissed on himself, began to cry, but muffled in that sound, I could vaguely hear a puppy whimpering not too far from us. I grabbed the flashlight and told the group that I would go look for the puppy. Grandpa wasn't about to let me go alone, and so he came along with a shotgun in his hands. We found the puppy not too far from the camp. He was curled up in a ball and looked a bit scared out of his mind. I picked him up and we were walking back to the camp. We were very close to the guys when I heard my friend scream his lungs out. Grandpa and I ran away as fast as we could, and we didn't stop until we reached our truck. We got in and sped off to the nearest police station. We returned to the campsite in the company of several officers, but mysteriously, no one was at the campsite. The tent was still standing and the fire was still going strong, but there was no sign of anyone in the area. We were taken back into town, and the following morning, we took the puppy to the vet and found out that it needed a surgery. The surgery had none to do with the incident from the previous night. The puppy was actually ill with something, but I can't recall the name of the illness right now. If you are curious, the puppy was a Rottweiler and we named him Brutus. Also, the surgery was successful and Brutus came out okay. We spoke to the cops afterward, and sadly, they weren't able to find a single soul after an extensive search. Horrifyingly enough though, they did disclose to us that they had witnessed a Skinwalker-like creature near the scene. They said that it walked on its hind legs, and all other description they specified matched what we had seen on that night. Till this day, I still wonder if my friends could be alive in some shape or form somewhere in the woods. But yeah, that's the end of my story. Thanks for listening. Hey guys, Dennis here. I just wanted to give a quick thank you to Matthew and Chance for submitting their stories. I haven't had the time to interview either of them for the rewrite, but I'm hoping it was done to their satisfaction. Don't forget to rate the video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.